Hello again guys, it's Carly from the Poetry of Nice and welcome back to my channel all about reselling online. So today I'm going to be sharing 10 keywords that you might be missing from your listings. So these are kind of subjective. In no way do I recommend keyword spamming. If it doesn't apply to your listing or to your item, I don't recommend putting it in your title or your description because you're probably just going to end up with annoyed viewers, customers, whatever you want to say. However, nor do I recommend leaving empty space in your title. I think that when you have the opportunity to fill up that title and attract more buyers and get hit more on like SEO and things like that, that you should definitely be utilizing that space. So with that in mind, I'm going to share with you today 10 different ideas for keywords that maybe you haven't thought of yet. So number one is going to be to do with the overall aesthetic of the piece, the overall theme or style. For me, this is words like boho, peasant, lagging look, hippie. If you're wondering what any one of these means in terms of being applicable to the actual style or the look of the piece, just go ahead and do a quick Google, and as soon as you scroll through those images, you're going to see that sort of the general vein that is in. So those are things I always try to squeeze in, like if I have enough space or if I think that it's something very integral to the piece, like it just has a total boho or hippie vibe, I sort of make sure that's a priority in my title. However, it wouldn't be necessarily the first word, but it's something that I would try and squish in there if I could. Number two is to do with the fit. So maybe it's boxy, maybe it's oversized, maybe it's cozy. These are definitely things that people do look for. For instance, boxy may apply to the chest measurement and the waist measurement being basically the same, meaning on a woman, it doesn't have a fitted silhouette, it has a boxy silhouette. Some people absolutely look for pieces that also kind of falls in line with the kind of like lagging look. Again, Google it if you're interested in what that means. But it's just kind of that like oversized flowy fit that some people look for. Cozy is really a word that I resort to if I really don't have anything else to put in there, but some people, when it comes to sweaters and things like that, do look for like cozy vintage sweaters. So the next one that I'm going to talk about, number three, is going to be to do with the print. Make sure that if you have space in your title that you are describing the print, whether it's a stripe, a polka dot, a Nordic or Fair Isle knit, a novelty print, a bird print, a seersucker print, that's to do with texture as well. Make sure you research that. Whatever it may be, try and make sure that that is something noted in your listing because it's something that's going to help your piece stand out from the rest if someone is looking for something very, very specific. The next one is to do with era. So I often like to put in, if I'm selling a vintage piece, roughly the era that it's from, whether it be 70s, 80s or 90s. I don't usually go the full way of putting like 1980s, 1990s because that's just too many characters as far as I'm concerned going towards that, but I do tend to try to note that in my listing. Just because, again, if someone is looking for a piece for whatever reason from a certain era, that might help narrow it down for them as well. I'm also going to just throw out there, Poshmark, it isn't really an option, but on eBay you do have a lot of item specifics to work with drop-down menus, and those are going to help you as well determine like your theme and your era and things like that. So just make sure you're paying attention to each one of those, and as long as you can fill in the information accurately, make sure that you're doing that as well, because that's just going to go ahead and boost you in search too. The next one is again to do with style, but it's something a little bit more specific. What I have written down here is pinup, rockabilly, or VLV, which is for Viva Las Vegas. So this is sort of a whole kind of like movement in and of itself. So again, with vintage pieces or often some contemporary pieces that are simply made to look vintage. Again, if you're not completely familiar with what that aesthetic looks like, go ahead and give it a Google. But you'll pretty much, once you've trained your eye just a little bit, you'll know it when you see it. And it's all the way through from shoes to dresses to cardigans to all kinds of different stuff. It's a very, very cool theme, but I do find that it's a fairly popular theme as well, both on Poshmark and on eBay, and actually on Etsy as well when it comes to the vintage items, so I figured I would just point it out. Okay, so for the next point, we're back to kind of theme or style plus era, if you like, and this is to do with like what you would expect to see in like the 90s. Often I use the word grunge if it kind of has that feel to it, like maybe it's a denim piece or it's overalls or it's like Doc Marten boots from the 90s, something like that. I'll throw in the word grunge. If it's from the 70s or the 60s, maybe I'll use the word peasant or hippie. 80s, maybe if it has that feel to it, I'll use the word punk or rock. It just depends on the piece and the era that you think it's from, or if it's just sort of replicating a look from that era. If it has a grunge look to it, and that's perfectly acceptable, use that as well, as long as you're making sure you're not misleading your buyer thinking it's a genuine vintage piece when it's just a replica from, say, H&M. You know what I'm saying. Next one is work or career. Again, this is something that I use only when I have the space in the title. It's not something that I think is completely necessary, but I do think it helps a little bit when people are trying to narrow down career pieces. So if you have a certain kind of dress or dress pants or even shoes or something and you feel like they are work or career appropriate, that is a word you could squeeze in your title as well. Next one kind of goes in line with something I mentioned earlier. I kind of mentioned cozy sweaters and stuff. Oftentimes on Etsy, I find that a great keyword to use is grandpa sweater or fisherman sweater, depending on the style. Grandpa sweater for me really refers to something with kind of like a sort of patterned knit. You know what I'm talking about, I think. It's just, you look at it and you think of your granddad. It's very hard to explain, but it kind of has like that hipster vibe. So again, hipster can kind of be a word that you might sandwich in there as well. And then I also mentioned fisherman. Fisherman to me is a very, very chunky net, oftentimes high neck or like a turtleneck, something like that. And it has a very, very chunky, thick kind of cable knit to it. I personally find that fisherman sweaters do really, really well, especially when they have a great fabric content and especially when they're made overseas, like somewhere like Ireland or Scotland. So, you know, they may be things you haven't thought of yet. And if it applies to the item, I would definitely pop it in there and see if it helps you get any traction. So the next one is acronyms, which may sound a little bit bizarre, but sometimes people do search by those alone. So a good example of this would be WHBM for White House Black Market, or for instance, UO for Urban Outfitters, or maybe like VS for Victoria's Secret. I see this utilized a lot on Poshmark because once again, you can pick the brand name from the drop down menu on there, which sort of helps people find it and search a little bit more. And I'm not as worried about using the abbreviation there because I have so few characters in the title. Sometimes with like White House Black Market, it's the only way I could ever say anything else about the item is to use that. However, on eBay, I don't think I would necessarily use it as a substitute for the brand name necessarily, unless I was really, really hard pressed for space. It's also worth mentioning as well that on eBay, you can use the letters VTG, if you didn't know, in place of vintage, or XMAS in place of Christmas, and it will still read exactly the same as if someone were searching for vintage just spelt out in full. Just so you know, because that might help you save some characters. And the last one is going to be for just more obscure sort of styles, if you will, that you may not have thought of necessarily again, but these are fun words that I love to put in when I find something that kind of fits that. So for instance, prairie or Victorian, or even the word tuxedo in like women's clothing if it has some like ruffle work. When I think of prairie and Victorian, I think of like high neck pieces, a lot of like smaller buttons, more modest pieces. Modest is a good word as well. I'm just going to slide that one in there. Modest is a great word as long as it applies to the item and it's something that maybe is high neck or full length or long sleeve. So in all honesty, guys, these are genuinely keywords that I use on a day-to-day basis when it comes to describing my items in the title and description. I believe in putting a little bit more than just sort of like loft red shirt. I think that the more information you can put in your titles, the more specific you are, the more appealing that it is to a buyer, and the more that you are bumped up into SEO when people are searching for something very specific themselves. It actually kind of becomes second nature after a while and it just kind of flows. But hopefully this can be like a little bit of a resource for people if they're struggling for keywords, which I know when I first started, I was kind of scrounging trying to fill in all of those characters, especially in an eBay or Etsy title. Let me know down in the comments if this was useful, and if you have any cool or unique keywords that you swear by, let me know down there too, and that way we can all learn from each other. That would be really fun. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me and YouTube know that you enjoyed this content. If you're new here, please do think about hitting the subscribe button down below, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, you guys.